Hey guys, Level Cap here, and today I want to talk about something that is very important to me as a gamer. It involves the general direction Battlefield is taking as a franchise and the unforeseen consequences of what may be interpreted as minor game changes that I think are having big effects on this game's playability. At the root of the issue, I feel that Battlefield 1 has become quite casual in many ways, and the effort to uncasual this game is moving at a snail's pace. It's been a trend with DICE games, unfortunately, one which I think was really pronounced in the recent Star Wars Battlefront. They made a game that was incredibly simple, somewhat inviting to anybody, yet now nobody plays it. I think DICE has been banking too much on the idea that making games easy to play or overly simplified will make them appeal to larger audiences, but what I think they are missing is that the FPS gaming community has evolved past the casual phase. Overwatch and Rainbow Six are perfect examples of how the high skill requirement of both games has not only attracted a large player base, but has grown that player base after launch. Retaining your current player base and bringing more players to a game shows that the game itself has longevity and a high skill ceiling in which players can dedicate themselves to a game and keep playing it for long periods of time and see the actual results. The Battlefield franchise, on the other hand, has always had its higher player count at the launch of the game and has steadily lost that player base over time. And in fact, with Battlefield 1, it seems like this is actually happening at a faster rate. Now, at the very base levels, as a player, I want something that I can work on and improve my skills going forward. With Battlefield 1, I feel there's very little room for growth, and worst of all, the game doesn't really seem to reward skill like it used to, or at least as much as it used to. Let me talk about some of the small things that really hurt the skill ceiling. Why not start off with something as simple as the bayonet charge? In its current state, it's one of the easiest ways to exploit a guaranteed kill mechanic. Too often do I experience soldiers activating their charge when they are a mere 3 feet away from me, locking me into a death animation unable to fight back. It's a cheap tactic that requires very little skill to accomplish. The other problem with it is the fact that nothing seems to counter it. So I can shoot a guy 4 times in the chest with SMG while he's charging me down, but it doesn't seem to slow him down, and then I end up dying to a stab. That doesn't feel particularly balanced or accurate. And this is pronounced even further when you're playing, say, the Flamethrower Elite class and you light up a guy who's charging you down, but because of his added health, he has no problem charging through all that fire for an instant kill. There needs to be some sort of counters to the bayonet charge. Fire would be a good way to deactivate the charge, and frankly, the added health, I think, might be a little bit too much in this game, especially given how slow the time to kill can be with some guns. Additionally, people can turn on a dime while they're in a bayonet charge. A high enough sensitivity on PC, and someone can turn 90 degrees, which makes dodging a poorly aimed charge almost impossible. For an ability that gives you a guaranteed kill, DICE has certainly given it every advantage in the world. I think DICE needs to revisit this mechanic and make it much more difficult to accomplish and much easier for a skilled player to counter it. If it's easy to do, it should also be easy to counter. Reducing point-blank range effectiveness is a must, and reducing the turn speed so people can't use it to get a cheap corner kill would be a good start to making it a strategic ability rather than a suicidal easy kill. The next game mechanic that I think greatly adds to the casual factor of this game are the frag grenades, a very hot topic as of late since DICE is actually starting to balance them in CTE. My main issue with the frag grenades is their detonation timer. The timer is incredibly fast, way faster than it was in previous Battlefield games, giving players an unrealistic amount of time to try and escape their blast radius. The new grenades actually function as smart grenades, that is, their detonation timer doesn't start until they impact the ground. Not a wall, not a piece of a building, but the ground itself. This exhibits a level of AI intelligence that shouldn't really be persistent in a grenade, and the frag grenade actually functions more like an impact grenade than it does the traditional frag grenade. In previous Battlefield games, the timer started when you threw a frag grenade, which meant if you used the grenade in close quarters, your enemy had more time to react, which was a good way of balancing them from getting easy kills. Now, to back up my claims of these grenades being way easier to use than they have been in previous Battlefield games, I've just looked into some of my own player stats. Frags are my preferred grenade that I run with in both Battlefield 4 and Battlefield 1. From Battlefield 4, out of 84,000 kills I received while playing, about 0.5% were from frag grenade kills. Only half of a percentage. It seems low, but when you factor in how many kills come from vehicles and assault rifles, it starts to make a bit more sense. Less kills with the grenade, but certainly a lot of damage inflicted and enemies forced to move out from behind cover. In Battlefield 1, however, out of my 16,800 kills so far, 3% of those are from frag grenades. That means that I'm about 6 times more likely to get a frag grenade kill in Battlefield 1 than I was in Battlefield 4. This is a huge shift in the general grenade balance, and I promise you it's not because I magically got better at throwing grenades. This is how much of a difference the incredibly easy, novice-friendly grenade makes to get kills. Skilled players can't dodge effectively, and bad players need next to zero skill to throw a grenade into a room. If DICE wants to make skill less meaningful, this has been one of the biggest factors in Battlefield 1. Returning frag grenades back to their old timers would reduce their guaranteed kills in close quarters. It may even be worth looking into the damage radius. I think it'll always be more interesting to use grenades as a strategic tool to get your enemies to move, or to finish off a kill, or to soften up your enemies, rather than just blindly throw them into a room for a relatively easy kill. They're way too newbie friendly right now, and I think DICE could really look into just balancing the normal frag grenade, which they have changed completely from previous games. Now, definitely one of the biggest topics I want to talk about in today's video is the general gunplay. This has been one of those topics that I feel I've really needed at least 100 hours of game time to start wrapping my head around the new weapon balance and gunplay mechanics of Battlefield 1. One of the most unnatural things that I immediately noticed when playing BF1 was the amount of random bullet deviation, especially prevalent in rifles that you might expect to be more accurate. The medic rifles cannot be fired at their maximum fire rates without incurring ridiculous penalties, which is not represented by your crosshairs. There are few things more annoying than looking down the sights of your rifle, lining up your target perfectly, firing, and watching your bullet miss by a mile. Not due to your inability to aim, but because DICE has decided to balance their guns in a manner that prevents you from being too accurate. This is an unnatural skill cap that exists on many weapons. You might have the best aim in the world, but you can't shoot better than the bullet deviation of the weapon. Rather than slowing down your ability to fire accurately by creating actual on-screen recoil, they have chosen to represent it with a heavy dose of random deviation. This creates frustration and poor tools to recognize why you're being ineffective with your weapon. Take a game like Counter-Strike and you can pretty much watch your weapon's recoil pull your shots around the screen. With time and practice, you can learn to counter these effects by firing the gun in the correct intervals and compensating for recoil by pulling in the proper direction. Battlefield 1, on the other hand, puts far less merit on burst fire and recoil mitigation skills. In fact, previous Battlefield games had weapons that would pull harder to left or right sides. This no longer exists in Battlefield 1, as all weapons have equal left and right recoil. A skilled player in Battlefield 3 or Battlefield 4 used to be able to extend the effective range of a weapon by mastering its recoil and burst pattern. Now DICE has decided to put a cap on the ranged effectiveness of weapons, relegating things into very specific range categories. A skilled player now is far less likely to be able to extend the effectiveness of, say, their SMG to a medium range engagement to counter somebody with a machine gun. And because machine guns somehow do less damage per shot than SMGs, they are worse in close quarters. This approach to weapon balance can be interesting, and I think it would be far more effective if Battlefield 1 was a real-time strategy game where unit placement was always well thought out and picking the right class for the right battle was crucial. However, in Battlefield, the chaotic nature of battles and large-scale maps makes it virtually impossible to predict how far away your next encounter or your next enemy is going to be. Therefore, the ability for some adaptability or some player skill to overcome a weapon's inaccuracies at further ranges can play a bigger role, and that's what they did in previous Battlefield games. If you were good enough at burst firing or tap firing or controlling your recoil with certain weapons, you could make them a bit more effective at ranges that they weren't necessarily designed for, and this would allow a better player to win out a firefight in which they had an inferior weapon. Battlefield 1, however, seems to have designed a system that's much more geared towards hard counters. Every weapon has its best ranged effective distance, and if you're not in the ideal range for that weapon, your chances of winning that firefight are very, very low. The feeling of futility is all too common in this game when you find yourself in an unwinnable engagement because of your weapon choice. The new weapon balance does not lend itself to skilled gameplay, but instead forces us into a rock, paper, scissors situation in most of our firefights. And I know devs like to throw the term rock, paper, scissors around like it somehow represents a fun design concept, but when implemented too strictly, it really kills the skill curve. Many of the things that I really enjoyed about the Battlefield 3 and Battlefield 4 gunplay are gone in Battlefield 1, and even the new quote-unquote high-skill weapons are often restricted by ammo capacity to prevent an awesome player from actually getting some real work done. It's been a true leveling of the playing field by putting a skill cap on many of the weapons in the game. Regardless of your skill level, there's only so far you can push a weapon before you're really just not going to get any more out of it. Oh yeah, and then there's of course the suppression mechanic. It's been around for so long now that I feel people have just grown tired of saying how much we dislike this mechanic. DICE's desire to replicate a realistic aspect of battle has been one of the most damaging aspects to the gunplay skill ceiling. Overly rewarding players for inaccuracy and shooting first has no place in a skill-based game. It's more hurtful to classes like medics and snipers, which rely solely on their ability to place shots accurately, and further increasing random bullet deviation as a reward to your inaccurate enemy makes no sense whatsoever. Now, the final thing I want to talk about is something that I've already discussed in depth, and it has to do with the scoring system. Rather than picking apart the details all over again, I'll try to summarize an incredibly complicated topic that I think is just as impactful on the casual state of this game as anything. Battlefield 1 has shifted points and scoring far away from killing and more towards standing on flags. This has not been a slight shift, but rather a drastic shift of 3 to 4 times as many points for capping a flag compared to Battlefield 3 and Battlefield 4. Now, making a change this drastic doesn't come without drastic consequences. What we now have is a scoreboard that represents skill far less than it did before. Stepping off a flag for 1 or 2 seconds before it caps can lose you 4 to 5 kills worth of points. Clearing a flag area of enemies around the objective while your teammate caps it rewards the capper far more points than the person who actually did all the work, making the capture possible. At this point, there may as well not be a scoreboard in Battlefield 1, as it sure as hell doesn't represent skill, and the fact that points for capping flags or doing actions that are not particularly well thought out or strategic are affecting my gameplay in what I consider to be a negative way. Standing on a flag cap with 20 other players with no enemies in sight is a complete waste of my time, yet it's the only way to stay relevant on the scoreboard, and I see this time and time again, especially prevalent on the new Fort de Vaux map, where you'll just see a giant bunch of players standing on a flag while that slow tick goes on because they just want the points, yet you only really need a couple people to cap it up, where it would have been much more intelligent for the rest of the team to push on to other objectives and accomplish other goals. This actually happened in previous Battlefield games because the cap points weren't enough to keep the good players from moving on and rushing the next objective. But now they are worth so much that it makes no sense to get a head start on the next objective, and everybody just sits on flags so that they can stay relevant and rank up and get the next unlocks. It's a really detrimental upgrade to the way that I play the game and the way that I think a lot of people are starting to play the game. We put such an emphasis on PTFOing that we forgot to expand the parameters of what PTFOing could actually be. Standing on a flag is not always just playing the objective. Clearing out areas around a flag, being somebody who stops squads that are on their way to the next objective that aren't necessarily near an objective at that time, is also PTFOing. Anytime you kill an enemy that's heading towards a flag point, that is playing the objective. But Battlefield no longer wants to reward you for that, and instead have simplified the process of getting points in this game to the point where I think it really hurts the strategy. Now you might be saying, Level Cap, you're too vain, you care too much about the scoreboard or your place on it, but that's my point exactly, is that the scoreboard is actually one of the most important driving factors in a game that's supposed to be skill oriented. A casual game would put no emphasis on a scoreboard, and it would not reward players for actually practicing and playing and trying to get better. The scoreboard is important. Paying attention to it is important for somebody who wants to get better and see that the game is rewarding them for playing correctly. And right now the game's message is your ability to kill the enemy players, slow them down, and shut them down is not as important as your ability to stand on a flag. If Battlefield continues to promote mediocrity in the scoring system, then the game is going to lose the core player base. And once that happens, you're going to have a franchise where the player base dies off right after each title releases. And according to stats on websites, it does appear that the current player base drop is more extreme than it has been in previous titles. And I'm legitimately concerned for the future of this franchise if DICE continues to head down casual road. There is something to be said for a game that challenges the player and offers them a fair and fun environment where they can grow their skills and perfect their gameplay. High skill doesn't mean uninclusive or elitist. It means interesting, addicting, and long-lasting. There are many changes that need to be made in order to bring Battlefield's skill curve back, and I don't know if the player base is going to wait around for DICE to deliberate about the correct path forward. Anyway, deployment of CTE has been a good step forward, but I think there's still a lot of work to be done, and frankly the gunplay, which I feel is one of the least attractive aspects of this game right now, has a long way to go before it starts to pique the interest of the more determined shooter fan. I have no doubt this video will inspire a lot of discussion and possibly disagreements. I welcome debate in the comments section. Please keep it civil and respectful. As always, thanks for watching. This is Level Cap signing off.